kicked out as a teen for false rumors spread by my brother. Years later, parents see my success and demand money after they abandoned me. Growing up with a twin brother should have been like having a lifelong ally, someone to share every triumph and challenge. But for me, it was more like living in the shadow of someone who was always in the spotlight. From the beginning, it was clear who was the golden child and who wasn't. My brother Matt was everything my parents wanted in a child. Studious, serious about the future, and a mirror image of their own aspirations. I, on the other hand, was the other twin, the one who preferred climbing trees to reading books, who'd rather throw a soccer ball than sit through another piano lesson from as early as I can remember. My parents made no secret of their differing expectations for us. They praised Matt for every day he brought home and scolded me for every B that marred my report card. They talked about his future with bright, shining terms: scholarships, prestigious universities, a lucrative career. Conversations about my future, however, were filled with warnings and worries, as if my preference for athletics over academics was a problem they needed to fix. This disparity wasn't just confined to academic achievements or future prospects. It spilled over into every aspect of our lives, including how we celebrated personal milestones like birthdays. Every year, Matt's birthday was a grand event. Our parents threw elaborate parties for him, inviting all his friends from school and filling our backyard with balloons, games, and laughter. There would be magic shows, his favorite foods, and a towering cake that seemed to touch the ceiling. In stark contrast, my birthdays felt like afterthoughts. If Matt's birthdays were a symphony, mine were a solo. No friends running around our living room, no streamers in my favorite colors, just a small family dinner and a cake that looked like it was bought in a hurry. I remember feeling a mix of resignation and envy as I watched Matt blow out his candles with a beaming smile, surrounded by friends and gifts. Knowing that my own celebration would never come close, the only person who seemed to really see me was my grandmother. She had a way of making me feel special in a way my parents never did. Whenever she visited, she brought with her a warmth that filled the house. She'd always smuggle me a box of my favorite chocolate truffles, hiding them in her suitcase until she could give them to me in private, away from the indifferent glances of my parents. "Keep your spirits up, darling," she'd whisper, slipping a few dollars into my hand. "Buy something nice for yourself. Something just for you." As I grew older, the favoritism became more pronounced, turning into what felt a lot like emotional abandonment. My parents attended every one of Matt's soccer games, cheering loudly from the sidelines, yet they rarely made it to my track meets. And when they did, they'd spend most of their time on their phones or discussing Matt's latest achievements with other parents. The emotional toll was heavy. I started to internalize their disapproval, feeling as though I was somehow less deserving of attention and love than Matt. I'd lie in bed at night listening to the distant sounds of laughter from Matt's room, where he and his friends played video games or watched movies. Meanwhile, my room felt like a silent bubble cut off from the rest of the world. High school can be a battleground or a playground depending on who you are and what your family background looks like. For me, it leaned more towards a battleground, a place where I had to navigate not just academic pressures, but also the minefield that was my relationship with my family, particularly my twin brother Matt. As we stepped into the more demanding years of our education, the disparity in how my parents treated us didn't just remain at home. It followed me like a shadow. Matt was placed on a pedestal. His achievements in school magnified and celebrated. My own, if acknowledged, were met with a nod or a fleeting smile, nothing more. It was during these years that the tension between us grew palpable, stretching, thin, the fraternal bond that was supposed to exist between siblings. It wasn't just the lack of attention from my parents that stung. It was their outright criticism of my interests and hobbies. I'd always been athletic, finding solace in sports and physical activities. However, my parents saw this as a distraction. They believed that time spent on the track or the field was time wasted, time that could be better spent with my nose buried in textbooks. One afternoon, a pivotal incident crystallized their disapproval into outright prohibition. I had just come home buzzing with excitement for making the varsity soccer team. I remember bounding into the kitchen, eager to share the news, thinking that perhaps this achievement would finally earn me a sliver of the praise usually reserved for Matt. The reaction, however, was cold, dismissive. "We'd rather you focus on your studies like your brother," my dad said, barely looking up from the newspaper. "Sports won't get you into a good college." The frustration of being constantly compared and found lacking was infuriating. I argued. Pled had tried to explain how important this was to me, not just as a pastime, but as something that truly made me happy. The response was unequivocal. No extracurricular activities until your grades improved to our expectations. My mom declared, ending the conversation feeling cornered and misunderstood. I retreated to my room, anger simmering within me. The lack of control over my own choices was suffocating. It was as if my desires and passions were secondary to an image of who I should be, an image crafted meticulously by my parents without any input from me. This parental pressure cooker only worsened with an incident that, to them, was the last straw. It happened innocently enough. I had downloaded Snapchat to stay in touch with my friends, a common enough activity for teenagers my age. But when my parents discovered the app on my phone during one of their routine checks, they reacted as if I had committed a serious transgression. Their fury was disproportionate. They yelled, accused me of being secretive and untrustworthy. You're just like your friends, wasting your life away with these distractions. My mom shouted as she threw my phone across the room. The screen cracked against the wall, the physical damage mirroring the emotional rift that widened between us as a punishment. They took the door off its hinges in my room. No privacy for someone who can't be trusted, my dad said grimly. As he removed the last screw, I was left feeling exposed and vulnerable, my personal space violated. It was a stark reminder of how little say I had in my own life under their roof. But the real damage was done by Matt, who saw this as an opportunity to further ingratiate himself with our parents. Instead of standing by me, he sided with them, adding his own accusations to theirs. She's always hiding things from you, he would say, casting me in a suspicious light whenever he could. His words were like fuel to the fire, reinforcing their worst perceptions of me. Matt's betrayal didn't stop at home. He took his deceitful narrative to school, spreading rumors and lies about my behavior. He told anyone who would listen that I was a troublemaker, that I partied too much, that I was likely to end up failing out of school. His words, though baseless, carried weight, and soon I noticed a shift in how my classmates treated me. Whispers followed me in the hallways. Friends who used to greet me with smiles now offered only cool nods or avoided my gaze altogether. It was as if Matt's version of me, a distorted, malicious caricature, was replacing the real me in the eyes of our peers. The situation reached a tipping point during a particularly heated argument at home about my supposed lack of ambition. Why can't you be more like your brother? My parents would often say, and during this argument, those words cut deeper than ever. I shouted back something I rarely dared to do because I'm not Matt. I don't want to be him. The house went silent. My outburst had startled them, and for a moment I saw something like shock on their faces. But it quickly morphed into anger, and any hope that they might finally listen to me evaporated. That night, lying in bed, I realized that the gap between us was too wide to bridge. My own family saw me as an outsider, an aberration in their perfect little world. The emotional toll was immense, and I found myself withdrawing, building walls around my heart to protect it from further hurt. School became a place to endure rather than enjoy, and home was no sanctuary. The conflict at home reached a fever pitch during my sophomore year of high school. The mounting pressure for my parents to excel academically and emulate my brother's path was suffocating. Coupled with Matt's continued efforts to tarnish my reputation both at home and at school, I felt cornered, constantly on edge, as if I were balancing on a tight rope with no safety net below. It was around this time that an incident occurred that would become the catalyst for an even greater divide in our family. It was a small thing, really something that should have been inconsequential. But in the high-strung atmosphere of our household, it was like lighting a match in a room soaked with gasoline. I'd been doing well in a couple of subjects that term, pulling in grades that were on par with Matt's. I remember feeling a flicker of pride, a rare sensation given the usual cloud of criticism that hung over me. Eager to share something positive with my parents, I approached them one evening with my report card in hand, hoping that maybe this time they would see me as more than just the other twin. Their reaction was underwhelming. While they acknowledged my good grades with a nod, the conversation quickly turned back to Matt and his recent acceptance into a prestigious summer program, a topic that dominated our dinner discussions for weeks. My achievement was brushed aside, the moment of potential connection crumbling away before it had a chance to solidify. This pattern of neglect had a profound effect on me, deepening the chasm of isolation I felt at home. My relationship with my parents became more transactional than emotional. Conversations were brief, limited to necessities, rather than any real exchange of thoughts or feelings. I felt like a guest in my own home, tiptoeing around, always on the verge of being reprimanded or dismissed. As the school year progressed, Matt's behavior escalated from passive-aggressive comments to outright confrontations. He seemed to derive a twisted sense of satisfaction from my discomfort, often provoking arguments in front of our parents, knowing they would take his side. One such argument erupted over something as trivial as the remote control for the TV. Matt wanted to watch a documentary for a school project, and I was halfway through a movie I had been looking forward to all week. When I refused to give up the remote, Matt turned to our parents. playing the victim, claiming I was always hostile towards him, and that I never supported his academic efforts. The argument spiraled quickly. Voices raised, harsh words were exchanged, and in the heat of the moment, Matt claimed that I was jeopardizing his chances of success by being petty and selfish. The accusation was ludicrous, but my parents bought into his narrative, chastising me for being inconsiderate and telling me to apologize. Humiliated and frustrated, I stormed out of the room, the injustice of the situation burning in my chest. It was clear that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I would always be in the wrong in their eyes. This continual side-taking emboldened Matt, and he began to spin more elaborate tales about my behavior. At school, he told his friends and anyone else who would listen that I was a troublemaker at home, that I was ungrateful and rebellious. His stories painted me as the villain in our household drama, a narrative that began to seep into my social life, affecting my relationships with classmates and friends. The real breaking point came during an incident that not only shattered my relationship with my family, but also marked the beginning of my journey toward independence. It happened on a day that it started like any other. I was in the kitchen making myself a sandwich when Matt walked in. His demeanor was confrontational, his gaze accusatory, without provocation. He started an argument berating me for using the last of the bread, knowing full well that our parents were within earshot. As the argument escalated, Matt did something that I would never have expected. In a fit of anger, he shoved me. The force of his push caught me off guard, sending me stumbling backward into the counter. The pain was sharp, and the shock of his physical aggression left me momentarily stunned. This physical altercation marked a new low in our relationship when our parents rushed into the kitchen. Matt quickly played the victim, claiming that I had provoked him, that he had merely defended himself. I tried to explain to tell them he had pushed me first, but my words fell on deaf ears. Their faces were set, their disappointment in me evident. The injustice of it was overwhelming. Not only had I been physically hurt by my own brother, but I was also being blamed for the incident. It was a clear sign that my place in the family was contingent on my compliance and silence, and even then I was not guaranteed fair treatment. That night, as I lay in my room, the door still off its hinges, the reality of my situation settled in. I was alone in a family that did not see me in a home where I was not safe to express myself or even defend myself. The emotional and physical barriers that had been building over the years had finally solidified into an insurmountable wall. My brother's jealousy reached a boiling point during our 14th birthday party when no one showed up for him on his birthday. I have no idea why his friends did that to him, but in stark contrast, my friends took me out for ice cream, and I had an overall wonderful day. This infuriated my brother, further to take revenge. My brother began to spread false rumors at school about me where he would portray me as a spoiled brat. He would falsely tell everyone that I was allegedly physically abusing him at home, since our parents loved him more. Unbeknownst to me, he took things to a disturbing level to fabricate evidence. He would punch himself purposefully, inflicting injuries like a black eye or bruised shoulder. The next day, he would confidently walk into school displaying the self-inflicted injuries as proof of my supposed violence and make up stories. Whenever our parents questioned him about the injuries, he would lie, saying that it was due to innocent activities like playing football with his friends. The lies and his alleged black eye started to gain traction, and people began to believe his distorted version of events. It wasn't long before whispers started circulating, and even my friends began to look at me with suspicion. At first, I noticed subtle changes. Friends who once chatted with me in the hallway suddenly became distant. Invitations to group hangouts became fewer and farther between. It was like a switch had been flipped, and people were hesitant to associate with a supposedly spoiled girl accused of violence. One day, I mustered the courage to ask my ex-best friend why things had changed between us. She opened up about how my twin brother had been spreading rumors about me. She revealed the detailed lies he had told everyone, accusing me of things I'd never done. I was shocked to hear her words. The feeling was a mix of disbelief and betrayal, as if the ground beneath me had given way. My brother, someone I grew up with, was spreading lies about me, accusing me of things I would never even dream of doing. It was a betrayal that cut deep, leaving me with a knot in my stomach and a heavy heart. I confronted my brother the day after our school, but he chose to ignore me. I begged him to stop lying about me, but he smirked at me and told me that I deserved to rot alone. I was at a loss for words because his lies and behavior were starting to scare me. I wanted to talk to my parents, but I was afraid that they would believe my brother over me. The isolation stung, especially because I'd always been open to making friends. It felt like my brother's jealousy-fueled lies were tearing down the connections I had built over the years. Teachers, too, began to catch wind of the rumors, It was a surreal experience, as if I were living in a parallel reality where my true self was overshadowed by the malicious story spun by my own twin. The lies had grown beyond mere teenage gossip. They were now shaping how people truly perceive me. The nasty rumor quickly reached my principal's ears, and then my worst nightmare came true. The principal immediately called me and my brother into his room, as well as our parents, so we could discuss these alleged rumors. I sat there heart pounding as the principal demanded the truth. I hoped my brother would finally come clean, but instead he doubled down on the lies. He straight up told the principal that, yeah, the rumors were true and painted me as this bully who went around beating him up when our parents weren't around. I couldn't believe it. Shock washed over me as my brother continued, spinning this twisted story about how I was angry at him for getting more love from our parents. It was all a bunch of lies. But he stuck to his story like glue. My mom began to cry, hearing my brother's story, holding on to my brother like he was some kind of hero. My dad tried to comfort my brother, telling him that it was brave for him to speak up and that he was not going to make sure that nothing would ever happen to him after that day. I tried to defend myself, pleading with the principal that it was all made up. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of accusations, desperately trying to swim to the surface. But my brother kept at it, insisting that I was this angry, violent person taking out my frustrations on him every day. My mom's tears kept coming as she held on to my brother, giving me accusing looks. It was like fighting against a wall of belief in my brother's made-up story. My principal reprimanded me strongly, saying the school didn't tolerate bullying, and these were grounds to suspend me. I pleaded with him not to suspend me, but he shook his head, saying he couldn't just let it slide. I begged him, tears streaming down my face, trying to tell him that I didn't do anything to my brother. The principal firmly told me that I would be suspended for 10 days so that others see this as an example to never bully anyone. It hit me hard, and I started crying even more, practically begging him to reconsider. My parents, angry and embarrassed by the whole situation, dragged me out of the principal's office. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to plead my case and make them understand, but they were having none of it. We left the school, my heart heavy with frustration and humiliation. When we got home, things took a drastic turn. My dad started packing up my stuff out of the blue. I was shocked, confused, and had no idea what was happening. My mom asked him what he was doing, but he just shouted that he couldn't let me live in the same house as my brother anymore. I was crying practically on my knees and pleaded with my brother to tell them the truth, but he stayed cold, unmoved by my emotions. My dad continued packing my things and then threw the suitcase into our foyer. I clung to my dad's legs, still begging him not to throw me out. It was like a nightmare unfolding. He told me that a bully like me didn't deserve to live in his house and that he would ask his mother, my grandmother, to come and pick me up if she wanted to do that. It felt like the world had crumbled beneath me. I stood there in shock, surrounded by my belongings, scattered in the foyer, or kicked out of my own home. Eventually, my grandmother did show up. She gathered all my things and helped me place them in the car, helping me into the passenger seat. She made sure I had my seatbelt on before walking towards my parents' front door. She rang the doorbell, and when my dad opened the door, she started to yell at him for treating me this way with stern determination. She warned him that if he ever approached me or tried to contact me again, she wouldn't hesitate to involve the police or the CPS, since what he had done to a child like me could potentially wind up with him in jail. My mother, attempting to deflect blame, told her that it was my fault. However, my grandmother wasn't having any of it. She stood her ground defending me, emphasizing that I was just a child who didn't deserve to be treated in such a heartless manner. That was the first time in my life I felt how powerful my grandmother was. She didn't cower down to my parents, and unlike what they believed, she trusted me. Eventually, we drove away, leaving behind my home, the only place I had ever grown up in. I can't even begin to put into words how indescribable the pain I felt during that time. I remember just crying on the bed, not eating anything, despite how much my grandmother urged me to. I told her what my brother had done, and she was shocked as well. She assured me that she believed my side of the story, and I was happy that I at least had one person who had my back. When the 10 days of suspension lifted, the prospect of returning to school felt like stepping back into a lion's den. As I entered the familiar hallways, the faces of my classmates spoke volumes, judgment whispers, and sidelong glances. The weight of the false accusations continued to linger in the air. Meanwhile, my brother blatantly ignored me and acted like I didn't exist. He had become friends with a few people who believed his side of the story and saw him as the victim of my attacks. No matter how much I tried to tell my side of the story to anyone, it fell on deaf ears. I was an outcast, branded with an unjust label that clung to me like a shadow. No matter where I went, the classroom, the cafeteria, the corridors, the eyes that met mine were filled with disdain and mistrust. I became a loner. I would keep my head down and attend all my classes, have lunch alone in the cafeteria, and would straight go back home. I had no friends, and it felt like everyone pretty much didn't want me there. Throughout all this, my parents never once called to check up on me. My grandmother would constantly remind me that this was not my fault and that life would eventually be okay. I graduated high school with good grades and was looking forward to college where hopefully I would have a better life. It was only when I went away to college that I first experienced what freedom felt like for the first time. No one was watching over my shoulders. No one was comparing my grades, and no one was trying to compete with me. I met people and formed friendships with like-minded individuals. Despite the emotional and physical scars I had sustained over the years due to my family and peers, I concentrated on putting it all behind me and enjoying this college experience as much as I could. During this time, I discovered my knack for content writing. I had always been someone who wanted to be a writer, but I wasn't sure if it would be sustainable for a long time. Hence, I decided to ditch my dream, but to earn some seed money. I decided to start writing as a freelancer. I signed up on various freelancing sites which helped me secure jobs from prominent clients. This is how I slowly started building a portfolio of my work. Throughout college, I maintained this side hustle and never asked for a penny from my parents. When I graduated from college, instead of getting a corporate job, I realized that I could pursue content writing as a full-time job. I was doing quite well because of the multiple clients and the long-term professional relationships I had with them, which allowed them to rope me in multiple projects of theirs. Having a legitimate freelancing career not only made me financially independent, but also allowed me to travel the world as a digital nomad. Traveling helped heal me from my past. Even though it was definitely not easy, I saved up as much as I could and took a chance on myself. Over the years, I've seen so much of the world, and yet I have so much of it left to see. The only person who I considered my family throughout all this was my grandmother, and I absolutely adored her. She was very sad when I moved out, but she understood that I needed to be independent on my own. Despite my hectic schedule, I would make it a point to be there for her whenever I could. I would visit her on the weekends, often sharing meals together or simply sitting on the porch, engrossed in conversations that ranged from childhood tales to more recent happenings. On weekends, I would dedicate entire afternoons to helping her with household chores or accompanying her to the local park for a leisurely walk. Recently, I got done with one of the most important projects of my career. I can't mention the brand, but I was extremely lucky to write blogs and product descriptions for them. After the project was done, I requested the team I worked with to leave me positive reviews on my websites, which they were more than happy to do. So I then took screenshots of some of their reviews to post on my Instagram, as I knew working with this brand was a huge deal. As expected, a lot of other content writers reached out to congratulate me on my professional success and even reposted my story to help spread the word. This is how I started getting messages from strangers who also needed help with their website. My relatives noticed this as well, and some of them reached out to congratulate me. Eventually, I was contacted by my college's principal. He had reached out to me after seeing that I was doing so well and wanted me to come to college for a seminar to talk to students about building a career as a content writer. I was quite nervous as I don't do well when it comes to public speaking, but I decided to take a chance and agreed when I found myself standing before eager faces. Sharing my experiences and insights, I felt like my life had come full circle. I spoke in my speech about the struggles I faced and how I worked hard to sustain myself despite all the hard days. It was honestly a very fulfilling experience to empower others and contribute to the growth of the writers' community. Some of my clips started going viral on Facebook groups as people reasoned with it. It felt good to be finally recognized for my hard work. Last week, I was invited to speak at a local news channel. It was a show about the benefits of content writing, and they invited me to share my journey and insights with their viewers. I was a bit nervous, but also excited for the opportunity. During the show, I talked about my experiences, the importance of client reviews, and how a simple appreciation post could open doors to incredible opportunities. The opportunity to reach a broader audience and inspire more individuals in the field was both humbling and exhilarating. When it finally aired, I shared some of these clips on my Instagram also, as I was proud about being invited to a TV show. This is how my relatives and cousins started finding out how well I was doing in my career. You see, because my parents never talked about me to anyone, they had no idea that I was working with popular brands and getting invited to TV shows. This is how word quickly spread within my family. I guess this TV interview must have finally reached my parents' ears also, because just a few days later I was working on another project and had my phone on silent when I was done with my work. I checked my phone, and to my surprise, there were 6 missed calls from my mom. I was honestly shocked to see her name on my phone, as it had been a long, long time since she had called me after all those years of silence. I couldn't fathom why she was calling me. I hesitatingly called her back and she picked up immediately. I asked her if everything was okay, and my mom started to congratulate me. My dad, probably sitting right there with Mom, jumped into the conversation. Also, he started to inquire about my life and well-being, and I answered their questions without much thought. It didn't strike me as unusual until they began to ask how much I was earning these days. I told them that it was none of their business, and my dad replied that we were family, so I shouldn't feel shy telling them my income. I told them that I was doing well financially by hearing this. My mom then began to say how hard their life was these days. My brows furrowed in suspicion. Basically, here's how our conversation pretty much went. Mom, we are retired now, and we have been wanting to renovate the house for a while now. It's not in the best shape, but we have no savings left me. Okay, Mom, your success has given us hope. After watching your TV interview today, we thought maybe you could help us out by paying for the renovations. Dad, after all, we are a family. You shouldn't hesitate to share some of your earnings with us. We can really use your help. Me? Are you joking with me? Why are you asking me for money when you haven't even talked to me for years? I don't know what made you decide to reach out to me. And while I appreciate the congratulations, I'm not going to help you out in any way. Hearing this, my mom started saying how I was being a bitch and that I needed to support them as a family. My dad also added that as my parents, they deserved to be looked out after and that this was the least that we could do. I was so pissed at this that I wanted to give them a piece of my mind. I suddenly got an idea that instead of just arguing with them, I should teach them a lesson forever, thinking that they could mooch off me after mistreating me all those years ago. I told my parents that I was willing to help them if and only if they agreed to my demands. My dad curiously asked me what it was without hesitation. I laid out my demand if they wanted my help. They had to publicly admit in front of our family and friends that my brother was the mastermind behind the hurtful rumors that had tarnished my reputation. I wanted them to humiliate my brother the same way they had humiliated me in front of everyone by believing his lies and manipulations. I wanted them to take accountability for their actions and acknowledge the pain they had caused. Hearing my impossible condition, my dad began to question the necessity of such an admission. My mom told me how this was all quite unnecessary and that we could have a private discussion without involving others, but I held my ground. This condition was non-negotiable or a prerequisite for any assistance they wanted me to offer them in the future. As the tension escalated, my dad raised his voice, asserting his role as my father, and started to emphasize that it was my duty to help my family in need. My mom, in a last-ditch effort, urged me to do the right thing and help them, emphasizing the years they had spent raising me. I couldn't help but find irony in their sudden appeal. I reminded them of the past, of the fact that they had kicked me out, and it was my grandmother who had raised me, not them. They started to get more and more agitated, but I told them firmly that if they wanted to establish contact with me and seek my financial assistance from now on, then the truth needed to be acknowledged publicly, and my brother needed to face consequences for his actions. Since this conversation, my parents have been trying to incessantly call me, but I'm ignoring their calls. I'm starting to regret even calling them back that day. I would like to know if I would really be in a hole if I didn't help my parents at all. Update 1. It's been a whirlwind of a week since I last shared my story, and the support and encouragement I have been receiving from everyone has been overwhelming. It's heartening to know that I'm not alone during this time. I am glad that everyone agrees that I should not engage with my parents or even consider helping them out after what they put me through. The reason I even gave them such a condition was because I knew it was pretty much impossible for them to do it. I know they love my brother too much, and despite the fact that they might have found out by now that it was all his lies, I know they will never put him through what they put me through today. My brother sent me a nasty text message after my parents again tried to contact me, and I refused to pick up their calls. This is what he wrote. He says, "It's been a long time since I saw you, and I can tell you that every day without you in my life has been great. I heard that Mom and Dad reached out to you and you gave them a crazy ultimatum. They are never going to go through with it. You know that, right? They clearly never loved you, and they will never do anything to hurt me. I admit that I did lie about you 15 years ago, but it's been a long time since then. So stop being so selfish and try to move on from the past. You are unmarried and childless anyway, so why do you not want to help them out by paying for their repairs and renovations around the house? Do the right thing and be a better daughter." Seeing the message felt like a stab to my chest. The audacity to dismiss the struggles I had faced and the conditions I had set spoke volumes about his lack of empathy. The attempt to guilt-trip me by emphasizing my unmarried and childless status added another layer of insensitivity. His insinuation that I should prioritize their needs over my own well-being was not only offensive, but also highlighted how little he thought of me. Fueled by frustration and a strong desire for justice, I decided it was time to take matters into my own hands and reveal the truth that had been hidden for too long. I sat down to write an email to my parents and close relatives, sharing the painful details of my childhood and the unfair treatment I had endured while growing up at my family house. In the email, I described the strict and oppressive environment I had under my parents' roof and how they treated me compared to my twin brother. The email also delved into the malicious and completely untrue rumor my brother had spread about me in school, which had led to severe consequences and affected my reputation. I wrote how my parents had kicked me out to the curb, and had it not been my grandmother, I might have been dead in the streets by now. Towards the end, I asked everyone to read a message my brother had sent me. I attached a screenshot where he admitted to lying about me. It was a clear confession that I hoped would expose the lies that had persisted for too long. I sent the email just an hour ago, and I know that all hell will break loose once my parents and my brother read it. I will update you next regarding how my family reacts to my email update too. It's been a month since my last update, and a lot of things have happened this month. As you can imagine, my family did erupt after receiving the email. My parents have received criticism from relatives who were previously unaware of the extent of the favoritism and emotional abuse. A lot of the family members reached out to me telling me that they had no idea about all this and apologized to me for not being there for me. My brother and my parents sent me a barrage of text messages that were starting to get more abusive and violent. So I decided to reach out to a lawyer who sent them a notice of cease and desist. It basically warned them to not contact me further, and if they did, they would have to face dire legal consequences. I guess this must have scared them straight because they stopped contacting me. My grandmother thinks I've done the right thing by letting everyone know what happened and supports me 100%. She's the only person who matters to me, so I'm glad she has my back. Update 3. It's been 2 months since my last update. I am happy to report that everything in my life is going well for now. Professionally, my content writing business has been flourishing. The invitations to speak at seminars and podcasts continue to roll in, solidifying my position as a respected figure in my line of work. I am as close to my grandmother as ever. I took a 1-week break from my work recently so I could spend some quality time with her. She's into gardening these days and educated me a lot about various flowers and herbs in her garden. The moments I spent with her, whether sharing meals, engaging in heartfelt conversations, or simply enjoying each other's company, are my favorite and cherished memories. My family has not contacted me after the letter they received from my lawyer, so I'm happy that they are staying away from me. Personally, I have started going to therapy, so hopefully I can work on healing myself. I think this will be the last update for now. Kicked out at 18. Now, 10 years later, my parents have lost everything. Hey everyone, just wanted to share a bit about my background, which I guess is a little different from what most people might expect. I'm a 30-year-old guy, and growing up, it became pretty clear to me that my parents hadn't planned on having kids at all. I was an only child, and from what I've pieced together from relatives, it sounds like my parents were set on being child-free when they got married. They've pretty much confirmed it without saying it outright. My early childhood days were okay, I guess. I remember them being around more when I was little, probably because little kids are cute and easy to show off. But as I started getting older, past that cute phase, I noticed a shift. My parents both worked a lot. They had this business they started together, and honestly, it was like their first real kid. That business was everything to them, and I often felt like I was just there, kind of like background music in their busy lives. We didn't have any close family members nearby. My grandparents and other relatives lived states away, and I barely knew anything about them until I was much older. So, without any real family connection nearby, I ended up being pretty much raised by whatever was on TV and whatever my school teachers felt like drumming into me. Birthdays? Well, by the time I hit my teens, they were nothing special. My parents would hand me some money and tell me to just buy whatever I wanted. That was their idea of a celebration. Christmas and other holidays were pretty much the same deal. I actually had to convince my parents to buy a fake Christmas tree when I was 10 because they didn't see the point in keeping up that kind of tradition. I wanted at least that bit of normalcy, you know? So, we got this fake tree that I could set up and take down each year by myself. As for my parents, if I had to paint a picture of them, think of those folks who always dress in black, sip wine like it's water, and have that kind of aloof air that makes you think they're probably judging you. That's them. And from what I can tell, Not much has changed over the years. Last I saw them, my dad was still rocking his toupee, and they both seemed exactly like they always were. Now, when I turned 16, I asked my parents if I could work part-time for them at their business, and they just told me they had no open positions or anything like that. They may as well have just come right out and said they didn't want me there. After I turned 18, my parents told me that since I was an adult, they expected me to move out as soon as I was able. I was working part-time because I was still in high school, and I didn't have anywhere near enough saved for college. And not long after high school ended, my parents told me to pack up and move out. They got an official eviction notice that gave me 30 days and everything. They didn't even help me move. I had to get help from a friend's dad who owns a truck. I ended up renting a crappy apartment and working retail. I had no real-life experience and no time for college. Then, after just a few months, I got fired because my manager legitimately had it out for me and wrote me up for the stupidest things. I don't even remember what they were anymore, but I wasn't the only one the manager treated that way. I called corporate about it, and so did a few other people. Corporate looked into the manager, and they were soon fired for various reasons, not many of which I actually know since it was mostly kept quiet. But someone told me theft of cigarettes was a part of it, and the manager was a chain smoker. Corporate refused to rehire me, and only said that they'd changed the record to say I was laid off instead of terminated, so my resume would still be clean. Yes, they considered me damaged goods or something. I ended up going broke pretty fast because I was terrible at managing my own money and couldn't find steady employment. So I lost my apartment. I went back to my parents begging for help, but they refused to take me in, not even for a little while to get back on my feet. I ended up homeless and living out of a tent in someone's backyard in winter. My friends had all moved on to college, some in other states, and I was a kid taking whatever work I could to stay alive. My salvation came when one of the neighbors of my parents found out I was living out of a tent and offered to take me in for a little while, so I wouldn't freeze. She helped me badger my parents into telling me how to get in touch with the other members of my estranged family. My parents did not want to say, "My guess is out of fear of being judged for throwing their son out the way they did," but they coughed up the info and gave me a list of contact details, and then told me not to bother them ever again. I called my grandparents from my father's side of the family, and they were very surprised and happy to hear from me because they hadn't seen me since I was an infant, and I'm their only grandchild. My grandparents, after finding out my situation, flew me over to live with them as soon as they could. They basically adopted me. My parents didn't even see me off at the airport despite being invited to. I had zero contact with them for pretty much a decade. My grandparents said they despised my parents for treating me so poorly, and legally disowned them by striking them from their wills. My parents, I'm told, were not happy to hear that, but also said it didn't really matter because they were plenty well off and didn't need anything from my grandparents. How wrong that statement turned out to be. After about a year of living with my grandparents, I was able to afford to start going to community college. I got an associate's degree, got a decent job thanks to a recommendation from my grandpa, and eventually my grandparents offered to sell me their house so they could retire to Arizona. My grandma wanted to live in a warmer climate as the cold winter was getting harder and harder on her health every year. I was sad to see them go, but I happily bought the house. They sold it to me for 1/3 its value, and I'll have it paid off in a few more years. My job is me going away on the road periodically, so I can end up away from home for weeks at a time. Not that I mind the travel. I have no pets or a girlfriend or anything like that. I wouldn't have time for them right now, but in a few years when I have some things in order, I'll make time. I don't want to stay a lonely bachelor forever. Then one day in late 2020, I came home after being away for over 2 weeks, only to find a large white van I did not recognize in my driveway. I was getting ready to call police when I noticed the van had the logo from my parents' business on the side of it, and I felt dread. Yes, my parents were there. They'd broken in somehow and were living out of my home. And they had the nerve to greet me like we were buddy/buddy the moment I walked in. I told them to get the hell out, and they refused because it was Grandma and Grandpa. House. I said it wasn't their house anymore. They'd sold it to me when they retired. They'd have known that if they were in any way involved with my life, that they threw me to the wolves 10 years prior with no life experience. We argued, and they refused to leave. My father told me it was his parents' house first, and that meant he and my mother had the right to live there if they wanted. I walked right into my bedroom, locked the door, and called the police. When the cops showed up, they were of no help. My parents claimed to them that they had already been there long enough to have residency, which was a complete lie. But I had no cameras to prove they weren't there a month. My neighbors had no cameras either, so it was my word against my parents over how long they've really been there. And they were claiming squatters' rights. They told police they had a verbal rental agreement with me and that I was trying to illegally evict them for no reason. My mother even put on the waterworks when saying that. The police told me it was a family dispute and to file eviction with the courts to get them out. And this was in 2020. Getting to court for anything took longer because of the pandemic. Meanwhile, my parents are squatting in my house rent-free and rubbing it in my face from the information I got out of them. Their business went bankrupt, and they sold off almost everything they had to pay their debts. All they had left was the van and a few personal belongings. So they expected to live in my house rent-free for the foreseeable future. They were working too. Both of them soon got new jobs. My father as a delivery driver, my mother as a sales associate. They were making money, and the only things they contributed to was electricity and water utilities, which was basically just handing me a $100 bill every month and saying I should be grateful they were paying me anything anytime I tried to discuss proper rent with them. They just said I owed it to them to live rent-free because I took 18 years of their lives. And it's not like they were demanding the money back for that time, then threatened to stop helping with the utilities altogether. I was so at my wit's end that I ended up calling my grandparents to explain the situation to them. They were very unhappy and spoke with my parents, but my parents still said they had the right to stay in my home and refused to budge. My grandpa told me he was sorry it had come to this, and that if they hadn't sold me the house, my parents wouldn't have invaded. I told him not to worry. I'd already filed for a legal eviction and would get it soon enough, and my parents already knew that they were on borrowed time. I made sure to say that in earshot of my parents too. They responded with a silent treatment. My father was away most of the time, driving a delivery vehicle 6 days a week, which was a job really not to his liking, and my mother basically tried to take over my house in her spare time. She demanded I let her rearrange my living room and even tried to force me to give her and my father the master bedroom because they were my parents and they deserved better. As she put it, I vetoed both of those things and said they don't deserve better, and to stop trying to act like I owe them anything. I didn't ask to be born, and it's a normal obligation for parents to raise their own children, and all they were doing was trying to assert dominance to try and keep me from kicking them out. Finally, after 4 months and now into early 2021, I managed to take my parents to court over their squatting. We only needed to go to court because they fought the eviction and tried to gaslight me into rescinding it. They tried to use the fact it was formerly my grandparents' house and the fact that they were giving me $100 a month as some sort of leverage of residency. But there was no real rental agreement, and they were smart enough not to try and forge one, as that would have been fraud. So the judge ordered that they needed to be out in a maximum of 30 days because they have zero claim on my house. After court, they confronted me and said they were disappointed in me for kicking out my own flesh and blood. I couldn't help but laugh and call them hypocrites because that's exactly what they did to me, without a care in the world for my well-being. They had no love for me, so I have no love for them. I owe them nothing. They just tried to act like everything that was mine is theirs. But they had no right to call themselves my parents because they've never really acted like it. I call them a pair of snobby, lying narcissists to their faces and told them to get their affairs in order because they already know. I won't hesitate to call police if they don't leave my house when the 30 days are over. My father looked enraged, but my mother stopped him from saying or doing anything by grabbing a shoulder and shaking her head. He sneered at me and walked away. They left, but not without a lot of tension. That final month was spent with them, either guilting me to try and make me change my mind or completely ignoring me. I put up a calendar in the living room and checked off each day before they had to leave with a red marker, and the exact day they were to be out was marked with a big red circle. I still remember that final day was March 2nd. My parents waited until the exact day they had to leave my home for good before they finally left, even when all their stuff was out of the house and they were sleeping on the floor in the guest room for a few days, since they were so convinced they could make me let them stay. They didn't bother to try and look for an apartment until after the court eviction went through, and my mother spent weeks scrambling to find an apartment. They had to get a tiny and crappy studio apartment in the next city over because it was the only thing they could find on such short notice. A lot like what I had to do when I was 18. Quite ironic. I drove my mother over to see it once, and the apartment was terrible. The walls were baby baths, green. The carpet looked like it was 20 years old. The only window just had a view of a brick wall outside. There was no dishwasher. The stove was the smallest one I'd ever seen, and the toilet looked like it really needed to be replaced. The walls also did little to stop noise from neighbors. There was already 2 people loudly fighting in the adjacent apartment while we were there. My mother went out of her way to try and give me sad looks while dropping hints that I should be feeling guilty that I was reducing them to live in such a place. But I just acted oblivious to it all until she finally stopped. They signed the lease right away, and moved what little stuff they had into the apartment over the weekend. They also ended up demanding the queen-sized bed, dresser, and flat-screen TV for my guest room. I told them to just take the damn things because I no longer wanted them in the house after they spent 5 months sleeping in that room. They looked at me like I was treating them as though they were deceased and demanded nothing more. The moment they had to leave for good, I started changing the locks on all exterior doors. All their stuff was at the apartment, and they'd spent their last night in my guest room. They watched me start ripping the old lock off the front doors. They were getting into the van. They said nothing. I said nothing. But they just sat and watched me for a while until I had the new doorknob on. Then they finally left. I breathed a massive sigh of relief the second that van went down the road. I figured karma had finally come for them and they could live under a rock for all I cared. But nope. My grandparents heard from them recently. They'd call them to brag they had a new business similar to their old one in the same state as I'm living in now, and they are basically on track to be right back to where they used to be in life prior to the pandemic, which was making good money and looking down on others. I've already Googled their new business, and it seems like it's doing well. They have many positive reviews and everything. I'm pretty friggin' resentful. Truth be told, they put me through being homeless, squatted for next to free at my house for months, then went right back to being the snobby wine-drinking business people they used to be. If karma is real, it's taking too damn long. Edit 1. I would like to thank everyone for all the constructive advice, and many of the points that are being made on selling the house, I'm realizing, have merit. I've asked my grandparents if it'd be a good idea if I moved closer to them. They told me that if I want to sell the house, then to go right ahead. My parents will have no clue where I am if I move away, so I'm heavily considering it now. I'm going to see if the company I work for can transfer me down south. I think I wouldn't mind the warmer climate anyway. I've hated winter since the time I had to live in a tent. I don't have many friends where I currently am as. I'm kind of a loner, so it wouldn't be too hard to start over somewhere farther away. I'm attached to this house, but it's not like I grew up in it, so I will consider moving. Yes, I understand the need for more cameras and will be looking into that. As for those wondering how my parents broke in and fooled police, well, it's stupidly simple. My parents got in through a window. I forgot to lock. They just pulled the screen off and opened it to get right in. Then they found my spare house keys. I kept hanging on a hook near the kitchen and copied them when claiming squatters' rights to police, as well as saying we had a prior verbal agreement. My parents presented working house keys to the cops and lied their little asses off, saying I'd let them move in. My parents had also already filed for an address change with the DMV online before I'd even gotten home and showed police a printout of that they'd made and said that their new IDs with my address were soon to be in the mail. The cops just looked annoyed, told me it was a domestic issue and to file to evict them like a normal person. I wish I'd gotten their badge numbers to report them. Small addition. Yes, my parents had their mail redirected to my house, which is another thing they used to claim residency. The thing is that if they lived in my house for more than 30 days with permission, squatters' rights would make them tenants. They claimed they had my permission and used every dirty trick at their disposal to convince police they had the right to be there. There was no way for them to confirm or deny how long my parents had been living in the house, and it turned into a situation of everybody pointing fingers and police didn't know who to believe. That's why I had to go to court to evict them. I did refuse to give my parents the Wi-Fi password while they lived with me, though, since they were not contributing to that utility. However, they just used their smartphones to run a mobile hotspot and got internet that way the whole time they were squatting in my house. Those of you saying that I should leave bad reviews or expose my parents' past, there really is no point. I'm going to take the high road there and just forget about them. However, if they committed fraud to start the new business of theirs, then I'll get some popcorn when that comes back on them because they'd inevitably call someone for help. Edit 2. For those who don't believe the 30-day thing with squatters, here's a direct USA law on the matter in most areas. Anyone who lives on your property for more than 30 days with permission can claim rights as in the eyes of the law. They become your tenants. When this happens, you will usually need to carry out an eviction procedure. However, in the case where permission was never given and an unoccupied property is forcibly entered and lived in, there are still rules you must follow. My parents falsified permission and lied about how long they'd been in my house. That's why it took 5 months to get rid of them. Now you know. Update. Well, I decided to make some inquiries and spent a couple of days asking around the family about how my parents got their new business off the ground. It's pretty unusual that they were able to come back from bankruptcy and get a new business started in under 2 years. No, it's not an MLM for those who thought so. Even my parents wouldn't resort to doing that crap. They undoubtedly think MLMs are beneath them. My parents' new business is comparatively smaller than their previous one too. I'd say about half the size before they had at least 2 employees. Now it's just the two of them. Someone pointed out I should be watching my credit for identity theft. I already was, and have been since I first started dealing with my parents, squatting in my house. I put nothing past them, and they knew it. Honestly, though, I'm not sure they even bothered to remember my legal information in the past decade anyway. Hell, I'm not sure they bothered to even remember how to spell my first name, but I did lock down my credit and there has been no unusual activity on it at all. So my parents didn't try to steal their company funds from me. At least my paternal grandparents, or my good grandparents, one would say, are the ones who actually give a damn about me. And they have no idea where my parents got their money to open up shop again. My parents have called them numerous times since they disinherited my father, and they have been refusing to take their calls since they called to brag about their new success a while ago. It's clear my parents had no help from my father's side of the family. So then what about my mother's? Well, I still have that old list of contacts my parents gave me filed away. And on that list was the landline number for my maternal grandmother. I did try calling my maternal grandmother back when I was homeless. She did not give a damn. I've never met them in person, but my maternal grandparents are a lot like my parents. I guess my father truly found his soulmate with my mother. As a previous commenter pointed out, they were made for each other. I managed to get in touch with my maternal grandmother once again. And not only was she long divorced from her husband, my maternal grandfather is no longer alive. That was news to me. But he passed away 7 months ago and he left my mother a sizable inheritance. So yeah, that's where they got the money to open up shop again. My maternal grandmother sounded so proud of them too. She had little interest in speaking of much else, and it's likely why my parents called my grandparents to brag about how they are so successful again. They wanted to rub salt in the wound. Since my good grandparents cut them off. I really don't care though, and neither do my good grandparents. Everyone on my paternal side of the family all say my parents can go kick rocks. They want nothing to do with them. I'm not the only one my parents have jaded. My mother's side of the family are full of divorcees and drunken loners who all hate each other and just pretend to act civil. My father's side are what I'd call just very normal and nice people. My father, though, burned bridges time and time again. When I was born, my grandparents wanted to be in my life, but for some reason my parents kept me from them. Why they did this? I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's because they didn't want to be judged on their own parenting. I'd have been happier if they'd sent me to boarding school or to live with my grandparents, but I guess narcissists aren't truly happy if they don't have someone else to put down. I can only imagine the stuff they said about me behind my back my entire life. Either way, it seems my parents did nothing illegal to open up a new business. Nothing that can be reported to something like the IRS anyway. No law against using funds from inheritance, a seed, money to self-employment. My mother, like me, was an only child, so she got everything when her father died, including his house and land. That's where my parents are living now. I've seen a photo my maternal grandmother sent me. Not the nicest house, but not bad. Comparable to my own, I'd say. But it means my parents have a place to live. Scot-free now, and likely won't need to bother me again. I want to sell my house and move. But it turns out the company that I'm in the employ of has no branch in Arizona. So it's either I quit and look for new employment in Arizona after selling my house, or I just stay where I am and hope my parents leave me alone. I'm looking into job searching because I really don't want my parents to ever find me again. I won't move if it's not feasible, but I'd prefer to be able to. It'd be moved to bother getting more cameras for the house if I want to sell it ASAP. But if I end up stuck here because of not being able to find another job in Arizona in the coming months, then I might as well get cameras installed inside and out. I've gotten a lot of good advice on the kinds of cameras to get and where to put them. I kind of doubt the same situation will ever repeat, but I just don't want my parents to ever try to seek me out again for any reason. If they need help when they're old, I'm not going to care. They'll get what they gave. Nothing. They're dead to me for the rest of my life, and the rest of my father's side of the family say the same. If I ever become a parent or step-parent, I'll make damn sure I never become like my parents. No child deserves that. Update 2. After the last update, with my parents finally out of my house and me trying to move forward, I started seeing someone. She's amazing, kind, understanding, and has been super supportive of all the craziness from my family situation that I've filled her in on. Things were looking up, and for a minute there, I actually thought I'd get a break from all the family drama. Well, that didn't last long. My parents, who have been pretty much persona non grata in my life since the eviction, somehow got wind of my new relationship. How they found out, I honestly have no clue, but they did, and they decided to take full advantage of the information. Here's where it gets ugly. One fine morning, I get a call from my girlfriend's dad asking if we could have a chat. Turns out he received a call from none other than my dear old parents. I couldn't believe they'd actually gone and done something like this. They had a long talk with him, painting a picture of me as some sort of monster. According to them, I'm the ungrateful son who heartlessly kicked his poor, struggling parents out of their home, leaving them with nothing. They spun a story so twisted it would have made a pretzel look straight. They claimed they were destitute because of my actions and tried to play up the sympathy card big time. My girlfriend's parents were naturally pretty shocked and concerned. They didn't know what to make of it, and there I was, suddenly feeling like I was on trial. I had to sit down with them and go over everything, from the very beginning of my parents' neglect to their recent squatting saga. I showed them all the legal documents, the eviction notice, even messages and emails between me and my parents. It was like presenting a case in front of a jury. Thankfully, my girlfriend's parents are reasonable people. They listened, asked questions, and understood the context once everything was laid out. They were actually pretty appalled by how my parents had behaved, not just recently, but throughout my life. It was a relief, but the whole situation left a sour taste in my mouth. Now, you'd think that would be the end of it, right? Nope. My parents, true to form, didn't stop there. They started showing up in places they knew I'd be, like at the supermarket near my workplace. Always trying to accidentally run into me, always trying to talk, to push their way back into my life as if nothing had happened. It's exhausting. Every time I see them, it's like they're trying to wear me down, to push me into accepting them back into my life on their terms. They act all sweet and concerned in public, making scenes that leave bystanders thinking I'm the one being unreasonable. I've had to start taking different routes to work, shopping at odd hours, just trying to avoid them. But they're persistent, and every encounter leaves me stressed out and frustrated. And it's not just the public run-ins. They've tried to contact me through every possible channel. Calls, texts, emails, even letters. Each message is a mix of guilt-tripping and sweet talk, trying to manipulate me into letting them back into my life. They talk about family and forgiveness, how we should forget the past and move forward. It's all so fake, so calculated, and it makes my skin crawl just thinking about how they're trying to worm their way back into my good graces. To top it all off, my girlfriend has been an absolute rock through all of this. She's seen the toll it's taken on me, and she's been there every step of the way. But I hate that she has to deal with this. I hate that my toxic family situation is spilling over into our relationship. It's not fair to her, and it's not what I wanted for us. We've talked about it, and we've decided to set some hard boundaries. No contact with my parents, full stop. If they try to reach out to her or her family again, we're going to consider legal options. We're also looking into moving a bit further away, maybe finding a place that's off the radar for my parents. It's a lot dealing with all this. Sometimes I feel like I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the next crazy thing to happen. But I'm trying to stay positive, to focus on the good things in my life, like my relationship, my work, my friends. So that's where I'm at. Another chapter in this wild ride. Thanks for letting me vent and for all the support. It really does help, knowing there are people out there who get it, who've got my back. Here's hoping for quieter days ahead. But who knows, right? With my luck, there's probably another twist just around the corner. But whatever comes, I'll handle it. I have to.